I saw this very close-up face with my ancestor, one of my Native American ancestors, who I later realized and connected the dots as Pocahontas' father. And he was so detailed and up close, I could see every single line and wrinkle in his face. And he was so full of love and so peaceful when I was so anxious in this space of I'm dead now. And he just said to me in such a loving but calm, grounded voice, "Don't worry, Kristen, you're not going to die today. You're here for an activation." We contract into having specific experiences to learn from them, but I believe that we can learn the lesson and then call back what we need to move through it. And it's come up so many times that my soul chose that so that I could help liberate others. And I believe if you go into the capacity for suffering, you have the ability to move into the same capacity for joy and love.
So, Kristen, your NDE happened on an ancestral pilgrimage. Why were you doing this pilgrimage?
Oh, why wasn't I doing this pilgrimage? So I found that in my work as a shamanic practitioner and also just being a human, having life experiences, that if you don't heal the pattern that you have that's unconscious, right? We have these invisible patterns. Sometimes they trace back to childhood, attachment styles. Sometimes they go back even further in multiple generations, which became the focus of my work when I realized that my relationships were attracting so many patterns that were repeating that I could see in my family line. And I know that when I was growing up, I had this fascination with Native Americans. Later found out that I am 7 generations from one of my ancestors who's right back there. And she's 7 generations from Pocahontas, which I never knew growing up until I was an older teenager and we started looking at family tree and lineage and looking at certain patterns that had happened in my lifetime that were coming up in my marriage were just sapping the joy and taking all of the life force out of my relationships because I felt like I was dragged into these patterns that were so similar to experiences that my father had and experiences that I could see with his siblings, even my sister, just ancestral patterns that I started to look into when I started to look more into my Native American heritage. And so if anyone knows the true story of Pocahontas, it's not the Disney story. It's not really heartwarming. There's a lot of dark undertones that I think Disney left out for good reason, right? It's not a good childhood movie, but in the sense that there were patterns where she was essentially sold by her, not against their will, but to prevent war outbreaking with the settlers and with my Native American ancestors. She was given as a peace offering to one of the men, not John Smith, actually John Rolfe, who is one of my ancestors. And they wed, although Pocahontas already had her own family and had her own kids. And she was taken with my ancestor, John Rolfe, and a couple different other men that were in his cohorts back to England. And so this is all a long story to say that my childhood, some of the experiences that I've had seem eerily similar to what I was reading when I was reading about my heritage and my ancestors. I was already seeing patterns that were playing out in my marriage, and it led to a divorce, and it led to me really wanting to get to the bottom of what these cycles were in my family and cycles that I was living that no longer really were serving me. That I moved upstate New York from the city and I started dating again after my divorce. And I'm still coupled with this wonderful gentleman. I wouldn't be here as I tell the story. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for him. But we love kayaking, and he's part Native American. And I said, "Hey, I really want to go on this ancestral pilgrimage. Will you go with me? Let's make a summer vacation out of it. Let's grab the kayaks and let's kayak my ancestral waterways." It would mean a lot to me. And so if I trace back the Powhatan people and the Powhatan tribe, it was part of the Chesapeake Bay area in Virginia. And so I figured this is the perfect time to go in the summer and make a trip out of it. I mean, at the end of the day, I felt this call to go on this pilgrimage, but didn't really know what I was there to do other than I was meant to show up, to pray, to ask for forgiveness on behalf of my ancestors, and to shift the cycle. So it was on the last day of our trip that I was really being called to go to the Mattapony River And I didn't know why, but it just felt like that was the waterway to kayak that day. And so when we kayaked out, maybe about a half of a mile, we went to this beautiful area. It was away from all of the houses because a lot of houses were built along this waterway. There was this beautiful open area with these cliff faces that went all the way up. So we were in this beautiful, almost like a gorge filled with water. And I was with my partner, and he was talking to me, and he was fishing. And it was interesting. I had this moment right before my near death experience where he was catching a fish. And when he took it out of the water, I felt like I was losing breath and losing oxygen. And it felt like I was dying, almost like I had this experience of feeling the fish coming out of the water and gasping for water. I'd say air, but water in that case. And I started to feel a little bit uneasy. Something was like weird in my body, almost like I was nauseous. And they didn't think much of it, just kept pressing on. And at one point, a few moments later, something ruptured inside of my body. I felt the sensation of a burst and liquid gushing inside of me. And at that point, I put my hands on my right side and felt something gush. It almost felt like someone took a water balloon and threw it at me, but it exploded inside of me. And I was wearing a dress. I put my hands underneath me to see if anything was coming out of me, but it was all internal. And it was that moment that my partner looked at me and he said that all of the color drained from my face and I went completely pale. And I managed to mutter to him, something ruptured. I think I might faint. And I thought I said I'm fainting now, but I didn't. He said that was it. I was gone. And the last thing that I saw was tunnel vision. So a very small little window, and all I could see was the bright blue of my kayak and the bright blue of the rushing water. And it sort of went sideways and out until the tunnel had closed. And at that point, I was no longer there. And what I say is that I was ejected out of my body into what I call the land of lights and colors. It's the only place that really gives it enough of a name because the colors that were there were so bright. It was unlike any color scheme I had ever seen. But if you could imagine the sunrise and the sunset at the same time, but all of the light was coming from this portal that I was sort of floating upon. And it was just light. And I remember leaving my body and having that moment of just seeing the water, sort of going right into it, that I had the thought that I'm dead. This is it. Like, it's ended now. So I had a conception in my mind of this is death. I am dead now. And it was so interesting because I saw this very close-up face with my ancestor, one of my Native American ancestors, who I later realized and connected the dots as Pocahontas, his father. And he was so detailed and up close, I could see every single line and wrinkle in his face. And he was so full of love and so peaceful when I was so anxious in this space of I'm dead now. And he just said to me in such a loving but calm, grounded voice, "Don't worry, Kristen, you're not going to die today. You're here for an activation." And so it was at that moment that I could see myself sort of in this beacon of light. The colors were coming out from behind me, almost like I was in the middle of a sunburst, and all of the colors were just magnificent coming out from behind me. And my male ancestor came and he touched my solar plexus. And I just remember my arms going out to my sides and all of this energy rushing through me. It felt like my cells were going into orgasmic bliss. And then my fundamentalist Christian background that I was raised in came in as a filter where I started to make this bad or evil, almost like I shouldn't feel orgasmic bliss. Like, what is this? And I somehow unconsciously brought in a judgment about the experience that I was having through the lens of Christianity, and why should I be having this experience, this orgasmic and so connected. And it wasn't a sexual experience. It's so hard to describe the feelings that I felt in my cells. It was like they were being electrified with light and love, but it was not sexual, but it was like that orgasmic, juicy, like vibration energy. And that's when I felt my Native American guide sort of became very clear, like, no, 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 this is not, don't bring this judgment in. It was like as if unconsciously he was pulling out those thoughts of judgment and allowing me the space to let that go and not create that as my reality. And he just said, that's a filter. You don't need this here. This is not your truth. And so I finally let go of that judgment and sort of surrendered into this charge from the universe that went through me. And it was during that time I had this unconscious conversation. It was telepathic. There was no need for the words. It was just a deep knowing that it was important to go back to my ancestors and to have this moment with them, and that somehow I was gaining something even though I was unconscious of it. It almost felt like they were recharging my batteries. They were setting me up for success, and they were healing something inside of me. And I don't know exactly what that was. It felt like there was a download and a knowing, but also a beautiful, blissful forgetting that was important. Like I was supposed to know in that moment exactly what I was healing and shifting, and something was healing and shifting for sure. But it's almost as if it's better if I don't know it now and I don't bring that into my day to day. But as their words said, it was an activation. And so from that place, I was just with my ancestors. They gave me this message. This is one piece that I do remember, which is they said it was not my time to die. And I had gone through this divorce. It took a lot out of me. There was a lot of grief and a lot of sorrow. And I've been a shamanic practitioner for the past, gosh, like 16, 17 years at this point. And I had stopped my practice. It was around COVID. I shifted gears. I was doing a lot of my own personal healing, and I pulled away from doing work with others and with clients. And it was almost like I forgot that part of myself. And this message was, go back to work. It's important that you continue this work, do this work for yourself, but you need to help others. And that's when they sort of gave me this message that part of my work that I needed to go back to do is to help other people with ancestral cycles and help people to break them. And so there was a download and an activation and a healing that happened until all of a sudden I heard a voice. And the voice was all the way down a hallway. It's a dark hallway, and there was a doorway to the left. And so I went down the hallway with my consciousness without actually physically walking down it, because I was still being activated. I was still in this blissful state. And through the door was someone saying, come back, come back, come back. And I remember the pull from that door was so strong. I opened my eyes and I expected not to be in the river, but I was, and I was completely wet. And I was in the blue kayak and I saw the river, and it was so painful. I remember feeling so much pain. What had happened was I had a cyst on one of my ovaries that I didn't know I had. And at some point during that kayak venture, it ruptured. And that's what caused me to go unconscious. And I didn't realize that when I would go unconscious, your body kind of slumps to the side. You kind of let go. And in that case, if you're in a kayak, gravity will sort of take you over the boat. And so my partner was there while I was out of body, and he was making sure that I stayed with us. And he said at some point he didn't think I was coming back. He's an Army veteran, and so he's unfortunately had to be in the care of others who have really needed it and been on the threshold of life and death before. And he said that he was watching and monitoring my vitals, and there was a several minute span where I had no pulse, and the life had sort of gone out of me, and he didn't think that I was going to come back. And his recollection of this experience is that he needed to get me because I started to flip over in the boat, and we had these cliff faces that were on either side of us. And he said that he had to find one little opening for his foot so that he could sort of cliff hang in the water and grab me while his boat floated away with his cell phone in it. And so while he was there with me, he was able to stabilize me by hooking his foot onto this ridge that came up out of the water. Meanwhile, his fishing line got caught on a fallen tree 100, 200 yards down the waterway. So all of our stuff was kept totally fine. And I think he had my cell phone as well. So all of that was in the boat and didn't get wet. And he got wet, I got wet. And he said that it was terrifying because he thought that I was no longer going to be with him. He thought at one point I had a seizure, but then he said I didn't have any of the markers of it. But there was one moment where I threw my arms out, and that was exactly like that moment that I had on the other side where I was being activated, that I felt that in that spiritual realm that sort of translated back into this physical experience that I had. So as he was trying to shake me back, I just remember so much unbearable pain. And all I wanted to do was slip back into that realm that was so beautiful and filled with divine love and peace. It felt so important to be there, but he kept pulling me back. He wouldn't let me go back there. So every couple moments I would close my eyes and start to float back into that place, and he kept shaking me and trying to keep me back here in this human realm. And I just remember feeling so exhausted and just wanting him to let me slip away, because part of me didn't want to come back. It was so beautiful. It was so blissful. It's just this realm where there's just love, so much love. There's nothing that anyone could judge or do wrong. We bring in this judgment into that realm, and even that is just sent away in peace, because that's just a judgment that we learn in life to have as a focal point to learn lessons through. And so he made sure I stayed back with him. And I remember at that time I didn't have health insurance, and I begged him not to take me to the hospital because we weren't even in state. And so he was really worried. I was pretty worried, but we went a couple weeks after that trip, and he took me back home. We went to that event, took it really easy, was still having really intense pain in my ovaries, and I was waiting to get health insurance reinstated to get some tests done. But while this was happening, the integration period after the near-death experience, a lot of really wild things were happening where I kept feeling like I was starting to leave my body. I would have these moments of feeling incredibly faint, and then I would start to feel the anxiety of starting to leave, and then feeling almost like I wasn't fully tethered to this world. And I remember that I got my health insurance reinstated, and this journey continued for a couple weeks until there was sort of like a peak ending to the experience that felt like the other end of this near-death experience that went on for almost like a couple of weeks. So I finally went to the doctor. I got health insurance. They did a couple tests. And I remember they cleared me and said, we don't see anything happening. Let's let you go back. We'll let you know if we see anything on these tests, but I wouldn't let you leave the hospital if we saw something, right? So I felt like I got the green light to go home. We still had the kayaks on top of the car. And of course, I'm the adventurous one that said, well, why don't we put them in the water now that I got the green light from the doctor? So we put the kayaks into the water. This must have been 4 weeks later, 4 weeks later. And it was while we were on the kayaks, we got maybe a mile, 2 miles down this waterway where there were no other places to get out. You got off where there was a boat launch, and then it was just winding through for many, many miles. And it was while we were on the kayaks, I started to feel sick again, like something was happening. And all of a sudden I started to have this episode, like I was going in and out of my body. After the near-death experience, I had a couple hours of feeling like I was starting to leave my body and almost fainting. And so I had to put my hands and my feet in the water to cool my body down to create homeostasis. And while I was on these waterways, I could feel I don't even know what it was. It's almost like I was starting to lose consciousness and leave. And at this point, I told my partner, this is what's happening, kind of basked in the water as much as I could with my hands and my feet while anchoring myself lower in the kayak so I wouldn't flip. And I had this moment where I just started crying, and I felt like there was so much that was being released. And I had a moment where he was monitoring me because he realized, okay, we're not leaving this waterway. We're going to stay here for a minute. That I had this experience where I left my body and was hovering above myself in the kayak. And whereas I thought I was going to keep going up, I met with my guides, and they came down to meet me in the sky over top of the kayak. And they said, you started this process a couple weeks ago, and you asked for this experience. Unconsciously, your soul has created this experience. And now we have to give you the rest of what you were going on this experience for. And so it was then that I had 6 hours of leaving my body, meeting the guides in the sky, looking at myself down below with my partner sort of monitoring my vitals, where I met with my ancestors and they said that they had more work for us to do. And it was so interesting. I saw John Rolfe. I saw those men that she essentially was taken to go live with in England. They would move her from place to place. And so I believe that she was trafficked, and that's part of some of the experiences that I've had as a child, that I had some really dark experiences as a kid that I saw playing out in my lineage. And I had this opportunity to sit with my male ancestor and these men that he had Pocahontas live with in England. And their mothers were there, and their mothers were crying and talking about how women are being treated and how women have been raped and abused for so many different lifetimes and generations, not only in my lineage, but looking at Native American women and looking at many different women throughout the ages. And there was this sorrow I could feel in my lineage that their sons had committed this abuse against my ancestor. And then I met with my male ancestor, whose face greeted me in the other side. And he sat with me and he says, we have to forgive them now. And so there was this moment and this ritual that we did for forgiveness. And it brought my male ancestor and those men to tears. And there was a big energy shift that I felt happen. And it was almost like there was a cheering on of the ancestors of the white colonizer in me and also the indigenous in my lineage, almost like there was a healing that happened for that. And once that happened, it was like I was being dropped back into my body again, and I was back in the kayak. And I had 6 hours of sort of like going back up for a couple nuggets of information. There was this understanding of lessons that I had in my marriage and this anger that I had during a chapter of my life towards the white man. And I'm mostly white, right? So it was this internalized anger, trauma, frustration that it's my soul was trying to work out for many years. And my guides that I met on the other side were with me, but closer to home, close to the earth, helping me sort of sort out some of the messages and the wisdoms, showing me, even my partner who's part indigenous, that it was important to me that he was with me on this journey, that he could really hold the space, and that there was this healing that had happened. Also this message about they couldn't take me back to the place unless I was connected to water, because all of the waterways of the whole world are connected. And so if we put intention to into the water in some place on the planet, we are connecting with all places on the planet through the molecules of water. And they were giving me this lesson about, you open this can of worms, you asked for this experience, and so we're just closing it for you and giving you the rest of what you've come here for. And so it was finally after that, I went to the ER the next day. I don't know if it was sepsis or what, but I got to a place where I could barely walk, and I was going in and out of consciousness, starting to almost faint. It was almost like this period of having these relapse moments that never started until the near-death experience had accumulated that ended me in the hospital. And they did the same test they had done the day before, but they found new things. And I was finally able to get on a protocol to sort of come back to self. But I've just had this deep journey for the last couple of years integrating that, where it's been so interesting, because I'm sure you've heard this from other near-death experiencers, that there's such a desire to go back to that place. It's hard to be here and to be human, especially once you've been there. It's just so beautiful and so filled with joy. And there's no pain in the body. There's no pain and suffering except for that which we bring in with our mind that can again get cleared from that space. And I remember just having a couple different bouts of getting sick with mystery illnesses since that time, where in this past winter, it's been, 2.5 years since that near-death experience, and now almost 3 years, I had this window of having these almost, they called it near syncope episodes, starting to faint, starting to lose consciousness, and then starting to sort of like feel like I'm going back to that realm, but not quite going, but starting to make a journey there. And I finally had a really difficult moment of sickness this winter that my guides came back and they gave me this message of, we gave you an important message, that June that you had the near death experience and you didn't bring the work to the people. And you said that if you weren't going to do the thing you were here to do, if I wasn't going to live my life purpose, I said I might as well be dead. I've said that so many times because of how beautiful the afterlife is and how much I want to be back there. It was almost like I had sung that into the cells of my body to convince myself that if I wasn't going to do the thing that they told me to do, then I might as well not be here. And so they brought me back to this place of deep illness and mystery illness that we're finally able to pinpoint what's going on in my nervous system. But it was this final hurrah of this touch of going back that my guides came in and said, what we really need to do is you need to bring the lessons to the people and you need to speak about this and you need to help people with ancestral healing and you have to do the thing that we sent you back to do. And ever since then, my health has been improving and I've had a lot of breakthroughs and now we're more clear about some of the health stuff that was happening. It was mold poisoning, by the way. Mold from some homes that I had lived in and been exposed to that were wreaking havoc on my nervous system and my hormones, and everything is so interconnected. But my guides said that, it was important for me to have this milestone to go to this place as a reset of a remembering so that I wouldn't get so sidetracked into the sorrow that I was stewing in. After my divorce, I was taking so much time to grieve. And it was in that process that I wasn't doing the work that I'm here to do. And it was almost like this wake up call to say, like, wake up, you're here to do this thing. Part of your healing is integrated into that, but don't stay hidden. Don't be buried in a cave away from everyone. Speak about this, let people know about how beautiful it is on the other side and how we are here to learn lessons and how we can learn them in this life so we can free ourselves, so we don't have to take that back and then come back into this world again with the same lessons and the same burdens. If we can heal it for ourselves, we can heal it for our future and heal it for our ancestors. So that's the story.
Wow, thank you for sharing your story. It's incredible. One thing that you mentioned through kind of leading up to your near-death experience, during your near-death experience and after, is you've talked about your guides. Um, and it seems like you knew of them beforehand as well. Can you tell me about the process of your guides in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So gosh, I went to school for psychotherapy, creative arts therapies, and it was after I graduated that I had a really challenging time in my life. I call it my quarter life crisis, and I lost everything. I think so many of us have these moments where we lose everything or we have to start over again that becomes this amazing opportunity that the universe or our guides or that God gives us as an opportunity for reset. And I had a time earlier in life where I was on a trajectory to go into clinical psychotherapy, study neuroscience, neurology, and to help clients through the lens of psychotherapy. And it was during that time that I realized I really needed the tools to help me, and I couldn't find them through the psychotherapeutic lens. All of the tools that I had been given in school were just not enough to heal me and heal where I had felt such traumas and dark experiences that shifted my personality. And it was then that I found sort of more of a energetic and soul path and became very interested in shamanism. In fact, it was like the breadcrumb trail of the universe were showing me soul retrieval, specifically a practice that is now the heart of my practice. But this idea that if we go through trauma, that part of our soul can disconnect from us and get stuck. And many people go through life, those parts of their soul have left. And many indigenous cultures around the world have a practice where if you call that part of the soul back, you can be reunited with whether the confidence that left or the trust or your voice or your ability to speak up for yourself. These different gifts that we have that we can lose along our lifetime when things get really tough and that parts of our soul leave as a protective mechanism. And so I started to study shamanism and soul retrieval and started to look at shamanic and indigenous cultures who had these healing modalities that were very different than treating the mind and the psyche, which is what I had grown up and what I was used to in my therapeutic training. It was almost like we forgot about the soul and ways to connect in with our soul and connect in with the parts of us that may have left or checked out because of traumatic situations. And so I started to study and learn about shamanism and learn these techniques. And it was then that I started to work with guides. And so the access point for me was through shamanic journeying. So using a trance-like state that's created from the reverberance of beating a drum or using rattles. And that allows our brain to slip into a theta brainwave state where we can connect in with our higher self. We can connect in and meet our guides, meet our ancestors. And so it was through those modalities of using the drum to go into trance to meet my guides that I connected with my first spirit guides. It was so interesting. I had a couple animals that showed up first, but my very first spirit guide was it felt like he was an ancestor, but they didn't know for sure, but he just identified himself as chief. He was a Native American. He was the chief of his tribe. And he has been my spirit guide for the last 15, 20 years. Well, when I went into that near-death experience, I met Chief. And I never realized that Chief was Chief Powhatan, which is Pocahontas' father. And it was in that moment of the near-death experience, I think it was a couple weeks later as I was reflecting on it, I realized this is Chief. This is the first ancestral guide, my first spirit guide I ever was connected to. And here I am 15 years later, working with clients, journeying for them, connecting with their ancestors, connecting in with my guides. But I finally had this full circle moment of realizing that I've been journeying for years and I've been journeying to that guide. And who better to then meet in the spirit world and then for him to show me that he was my ancestor. When I was on the other side, I did notice there was a female ancestor, but she was further away and I couldn't make her out and she never came close. I just had this elder man's face very close to me and he just was telepathically communicating with me through his eyes, but just seeing every wrinkle in his face, the wisdom, the character, and then to meet him years before, it was just this aha moment that I think I've been connecting to my ancestors for a long time and realizing that Chief Powhatan. So yeah, comes full circle.
It really does. Wow. I was looking into descendants of Pocahontas, and there are so many, actually. I mean, it's been a lot of many generations. Do you know how many? I mean, I saw different numbers. Do you know how many there are right now?
I read somewhere recently that it's around 3,000.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So there's could be a lot of people, and it's beyond, I suppose, just her story as well. I mean, there's people everywhere focusing or dealing with the effects of generational traumas. Do you think this is impacting a lot more people?
Oh, absolutely. And, the more that we start looking at genes and DNA imprints of trauma, there's a study that was done looking at multiple generations of rats. And we're not rats, right? We're all complex beings, rats included. God bless those rats. There was a study that was done where they were looking at what would happen if we gave electric shocks to rats while they were smelling the scent of cherry blossoms. So they essentially traumatized the first generation rat, and they found that up to 5 generations later, their offspring were terrified of the cherry blossom fragrance without any other kind of stimulus shocking them or giving them any kind of pain or hardship. But just the scent of cherry blossoms alone would create this traumatic response. And so I've worked with a lot of clients who have had ancestral traumas, looking back at the Great Depression, the amount of guilt and sadness and anxiety and worry and there's a lot that comes with a lot of lineages that if you see what has happened in their past, you can start to trace, oh, this anxiety is just like my grandmother and she was anxious about XYZ. And so if you know the ancestral lineage and you can look back a couple generations, you can start to see where some of that trauma happens. And sometimes it's so far back we can't quite trace it, but that doesn't mean that these interventions don't work. We just have to look at what is the symptom that you're experiencing now in this lifetime, and then what if we pull that thread. There was a client that I worked with a couple years ago, and I'll never forget this journey that we had where he was always whispering. He could barely get a sentence out that I could hear. And he was a yoga teacher. I had worked with him before at the New York City Open Center. Really wonderful gentleman on his healing journey. And I remember he came to me for a session where he really wanted to unlock his voice. And in that journey, I saw this vision of his stepfather, who's not blood related to him, but there was an ancestral burden that was on that man's lineage that was playing out in my client's life. And I saw it was almost as if there was like a ball and chain around my client's throat that had a chain that was almost like a leash that his stepfather was holding to have control over him. And they saw that there was a same metal that was binding his stepfather with a leash and a chain that went to his father, and it went to his father. And I saw multiple generations of this desire to control someone because they felt like they weren't enough. So a projecting of one's own insecurities as a way to control someone's voice. And it was interesting because we needed to call back that power, and we needed to call back that energy from his stepfather's lineage. And there was big shifts that happened for my client after we released and healed, not only for my client, but it was also important to work on freeing his stepfather and his stepfather's father and his stepfather's father. And it was almost like this cascading waterfall of energy that had been held back from a dam, and now all of the energy was flowing. And after that, my client said that all of a sudden his voice was really loud and deep and booming. And every interaction I had with him, it's like he became a man, almost like his voice had dropped, right? It had become more full and adult-like and loud, very loud. And now you could hear him instructing his class because you could hear his voice project across the room. And then after that, he said that every interaction that he had with his father, he was no longer afraid of him. There was this fear that he had his entire childhood that just shattered, and then he was able to stand up for his mother and set some new boundaries for their family. And he said that after that, he's developed a really healthy and happy relationship with his stepfather, whereas it had been abusive for his entire childhood of what he could remember. And he had a shift in that experience of working on the ancestral lineage that in his case was projected onto him by his stepfather, who primarily raised him. And so we see that there's so many implications here, not just for someone who's raised by biological parents, but how can that be projected onto other caregivers, or in the case of those individuals who have been adopted, how can that be projected onto them from their parents? And how can we sort of get this sticky web of other people's lineage patterns that all we know is that, and that's what we're creating. It's literally built into the chemical structures of our DNA to be in that way. And if that's passed down either through nature or through nurture, we can inherit these patterns that then can hold us back from, in this case, speaking his truth, standing up for himself, creating healthy boundaries, having healthy communication, feeling like he was on the level to negotiate boundaries and have empowered conversations. And so I look at that just to say that it doesn't necessarily have to happen in our lineage if we take it on from someone in our family. I also believe that we're attracting relationships that hold a similar vibration to what we've experienced and what our ancestors have experienced, because like attracts like, the law of attraction. And I truly believe that our soul is wanting to consciously overcome these cycles, but there's some level of us needing to be ready, consciously awake and available, and intentionally breaking those cycles so that we can heal them for ourselves and for the future.
Your work is so interesting. What are the most common reasons people seek a shaman today?
That's a great question. Well, the way I like to put it is that the shamans were the seers and the helpers that existed before psychotherapists. And I'm a trained psychotherapist. And so I say the biggest difference is that as a psychotherapist, I'm trained to hold the space for someone to go into their stories. And when they go into their stories, if they're circling around the same trauma, if they can't get over this breakup, or they can't get over this experience that they had in childhood, then we're talking about the story where something is missing. Because we're going back to that place where we've lost something, right? If you're looking for your car keys and they've disappeared, you're going to talk about them because you want to find them. But once you find them, you don't have to keep talking about your car keys and how they're missing and how they're gone. You just get the thing that you need and move on from there. And so in psychotherapy, my job was to hold a reflective container and space for people to have support, have that honest reflection, and to essentially mirror those experiences by helping them feel validated and understood. But that type of healing to me is so frustrating when you see someone that they're clearly stuck in a cycle. Whereas in shamanism, specifically the practice of soul retrieval, we know through psychotherapy where the thing is missing because we keep going back to that same story. And in psychology, the psychotherapeutic tools that I learned and I was trained in were to help build up the rest of that person's ego, because they're not just that trauma that happened. They do have parts of them that can step in. So how do we support the parts that are still here so that they can do the job to help that person become healthy and balanced? And in shamanism, I say, let's go find the soul part that left, because that's what's going to break the cycle. Just like when you find your car keys, you don't have to be stuck in the cycle looking for them because you have them. You're liberated from that cycle. So in this case, we're going back to where that trauma happened. Sometimes I find that it's in childhood. I've even found past life trauma through this work that I didn't ever believe in past lives until I started working with people and helping them with past lives. And that really made me a believer. I was born and raised as a fundamentalist Christian and very close to Baptist, and we don't believe in reincarnation, and that's evil, don't look into that. And in this case, I started to see these patterns repeating for people. And then the third most common place that people have power that's missing is ancestral cycles, looking at, like I said, that kink in that hose. Where did grandma lose a part of her voice to stand up for herself because of gender norms at that time, where she wasn't able to break a cycle for herself in her relationship? And how is it that her daughter is living this out and is not able to set boundaries? And how are we now inheriting the cycle that just perpetuates the same sort of pattern? And so I find that when I can go in there with those psychotherapeutic tools and bridge together the shamanic tools, we can actually go and find that part of grandma's power that she lost and the reflections of how we've lost power through that same pattern, and then bring that person those pieces back, and then they're liberated from the cycle. And what is so magical about this work is that you have most of your soul parts with you, or else you wouldn't be here on this earth living and breathing. But some parts can disassociate or get disconnected because trauma happens, and sometimes it's harder for it to stay in the body and easier for those parts to just sort of check out and take a step aside. Now, in indigenous cultures many centuries ago, we wouldn't go 3 days without having a shaman go back and bring back that soul part that left due to the traumatic experience. And now we go generations and lifetimes. And so I find that it's not just the cycle of what are we looking at for this lifetime, but oftentimes we have to go back further because we just didn't have the same access to these ancient tools or the ability to lean on self-help, self-care, looking at how psychotherapeutic interventions are now popular and how it's a sign of good mental health if you're seeing a therapist or you've worked with someone in the alternative healing arts even. We sort of have to work through several layers that our ancestors didn't have the tools or the capability or the space to consciously work through because of all the stigmas that were related. And so I find that through the psychotherapeutic tools, you can only get so far. You get so far as to the awareness of where the trauma happened and what left. But in shamanism, we have this ability to go and call back that part of the power and bring it back to that person. And the technique is that you blow it into the person. You reunite with the breath, that part of their soul. And this can be done in person. It can be done at distance as well. It's calling back and really reuniting the person with those fragments of power. And so, we used to have shamans who would help and assist in that process. And now we look to see how so much of psychology is based on the mind, and the mind even separate from the body, and the body separate from the soul. And so this is just a way to integrate that back in, where shamanism treats illness of the soul. And we find that a lot of times illness starts on the level of the soul. I've listened to some of your podcasts and listened to individuals that contracted with difficult life chapters of health, and how the soul can just make a decision to sort of clean that up and to shift out of those lessons and then have better health. And so I truly believe that we contract into having specific experiences to learn from them, but I believe that we can learn the lesson and then call back what we need to move through it and shift out of it, so we don't have to keep repeating that, right? But we'll have to keep repeating sixth grade until we pass the test, and then we can move on to seventh grade and eighth grade and so on and so forth on sort of the spiritual realm. So I feel like so many tests and patterns that we have are just ways to see if we're ready to move beyond that threshold, to break the cycle, oftentimes again for more than just what we've brought in. But let's look at generations ago that didn't have access to these same tools and didn't have the ability and the safety to go see a therapist or go see a healer because of the stigma that was connected to seeking out support for mental health.
That's very interesting. And I'm glad you brought up soul contracts, because I feel like a lot of people were interested in that one episode that we talked about that more. And people had a lot of questions about just why would I be put through challenges to learn? Why can't we know it already if we are like spiritual beings?
Yeah, gosh, I feel all the tears in me. So I'm not even sure what's here right now for that. I know that I went through some really difficult experiences of sexual trauma early in life, and it's come up so many times that my soul chose that so that I could help liberate others. I believe that the mental health of the world is in a sick place. And I think that there's been a lot of perpetuated trauma that has happened for multiple generations that's become so ingrained in our culture as a whole, in cultures around the world. Even just looking at, well, history is written by those who have won, and looking at just that, sort of coming back to that same energy of like the pillaging of women or of indigenous communities, of coming in to conquer and conquest, do harm to the space in the way, in the name of conquering and winning and conquest. And how, if you look at those individuals who won in history, if we're creating this perpetual mindset of taking and pillaging, then we get stuck with a culture where that's the backbone of it. That's what we know, that in some way is perpetuated throughout many different cultures. And I believe that there's some of us who go through those experiences and we continue them. And that's part of our soul lessons. Some people are not meant to wake up in this lifetime, and that's okay. But I do believe that there's some people who are still playing out these cycles, but then they have this moment where they experience the depth of the cycle and then swing to the other end of the pendulum, right? Pendulums only swing so far in one direction. I believe if you go into the capacity for suffering, you have the ability to move into the same capacity for joy and love. And why would you not experience the depth if you weren't not meant to experience the height? And so looking back through my own personal work and development, looking at, why did I have to suffer this way? Why did I have to go through these experiences as a child, has really illuminated that my soul is here to break a cycle, not just for me and my lineage. It's already written in the books here. We already know some of these lineage cycles that I've been playing out, but it's been part of my work to be a conscious soul on this earth, to help people become liberated from their cycles, the people that don't have the tools, the people that know that they need to shift it, but they don't quite know how, and they don't know where to start. They just know that they want something different and they're meant for more. And so looking at how I could never be a help to people who have been through intense traumatic experiences if I hadn't gone through the dark myself. And so being able to go into that place of empathy to validate their experience and be with them, I think enriches the work that I do, because I know how important it is to have that type of healing where I went through childhood and so much of my soul had left because of the experiences that I went through. And then to discover these ancient modalities like soul retrieval that was able to bring back those parts of my soul and then become this vibrant, happy person that was so different than what I knew of myself in childhood, where I lost those sparks of joy and those sparks of life force. And I needed to go through that to then experience the healing and these extreme, beautiful experiences of connecting in with the higher beings and connecting in with healing and happy, healthy relationships. I had to go through the gamut to learn the lessons on the pendulum swing into the dark to bring them to help people into the light. But I have to be able to meet someone in the dark. Otherwise, it's just uncomfortable for everybody. No one feels understood. You need to, it's almost like this experience of being able to go into these traumatic episodes with clients, but not come out with the trauma, but come out with the gifts. Where we go through life and people become cold and callous and they say, just get over it. And does that ever really work for anyone? Like, calm down, get over it. It just makes people feel more alone. Like they don't have someone that's in the trenches there who knows what it's like to go through trauma and to feel completely and forever changed from it. The good news is you don't have to stay that way. But I had to learn through my own hardships that I can swing in this direction. I could stay there, or I could work on healing myself and then come to these elated moments in life where I wouldn't have ever been able to be so grateful for these beautiful moments had I not go through the myriad of lessons. And I also believe that certain people come here to learn certain lessons, and some of them are a little bit more intense and deep than others. And that's okay. I also believe that we have lifetimes where we don't have to have it as hard. But sometimes we really want to cram in a lot of lessons. We think that we can, go to the Ivy League the Ivy League school on earth, and we really want to jam pack that in so our soul can come to a different vantage point for whatever wisdoms that we're here to really soak up. And so I've had those feelings, and I've been in that place of why me, why this, and there's always a silver lining, and it's usually not right away. You usually have to wait for it. But that silver lining is worth it. I mean, even the near-death experience, it was traumatic. It was hard. I had health conditions after that felt like I was never going to come back to the other side. Come back to the other side of health and wellness in this human body, I should say, on this side. And now I'm so much more grateful for these experiences and what that left me with. It's created that ability to go deep and to really, really be present with life in a new way that I was taking for granted.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I think it's a hard one to answer, but there were so many people who had questions about it. And Kristen, for those who want to hear more about your work, get in touch with you, hear more about your story, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can visit my website, theshamanatrix.com. I have a lot of resources. I've written some books. I have a book on soul retrieval, which is really enlightening for people who are just curious about that. I also do sessions there, and I run retreats about how to connect in with healing your legacy. This is sort of what was birthed from this near-death experience, is this journey to take others on to heal their ancestral lineage and then uncover what is your soul's purpose, because so many times we get pulled in the direction of all the cycles. We get pulled back into old cycles that need to be cleaned up for our ancestors. We never quite make it to what our soul is here to do in this lifetime. I always believe that everyone is here to create a ripple effect in the world, hopefully for the positive. I feel like a lot of people never really realize that for themselves, and they get stuck in the rat race of the world, or they get stuck in the old patterns that they just don't know how to break. And so my work is really now very much devoted to, okay, I'm here for a reason. I better maximize that reason. And that's really to help people to free themselves from those ancestral burdens and to get the ancestors into a healed state so that we can all move this energy forward towards helping that person discover and manifest their soul's mission, so that we don't have to keep coming back time and time again and keep going through these old lessons. We can ditch the old baggage and really create that new legacy with the help of our ancestors and their support behind us. So, yeah, you can find all that on my website.
Thank you to Kristen Von Foxx for sharing her story, and thank you for watching this video. I'm so grateful for this community of people, and I love reading all of your comments and messages. If you'd like to join our community, please subscribe to our channel, and have a great day.